Hello everyone! I finally got my hands on the Nyxi Wizzard, and in today's review, we're gonna analyze it bit by bit. In the box, you'll get the Wizzard controller, our user manual, and here we have the circular gates for the analog sticks, and the USB Type-C charging cable. And here's the Wizzard controller. It looks very good, like a Gamecube controller with some details from the Joy-Cons, like the plus, minus, home and capture buttons. The analog sticks are also different. And here you have two ports for charging the controller. On the back, you have two back buttons. And on the top, the triggers and the shoulder buttons are digital. All the buttons feels very responsive and can be pressed at any point. And the D-pad also feels very good. And of course, the Joy-Cons are detachable, and they have the SL and SR buttons in case you wanna use them sideways. I'm not sure why anyone would want to do that, but it can be done. Here are some color comparisons with other controllers that I have. Here's my original Indigo Gamecube controller, and it doesn't look very good. After all these years, the front paint faded quite a lot, but the back of the shell still retains the original tone, and you can see that it's really close to the Wizzard controller. For comparisons, I'll be using my black controller from Smash Bros. For the Wii U, as it is in a much better shape, of course. Here you can see that the Wizzard controller is a lot larger because of that middle section. But the grips are very similar and it has about the same size. The back of the controller is more flat compared to the original Gamecube controller, and you have that big bump in the position of the analog sticks and D-pad. The first thing that I felt when I held these controllers in my hands is that the grip seemed quite smaller than the original ones. It didn't have any support for my pinky fingers. I could rest all of my fingers in the original ones without any problems. So what is the difference here? As you've seen before, the controller have the same size on the grip, so it must be something else. Turns out that when holding the original controller, my middle finger is accommodated under the analog stick. But when holding the Nyxi Wizzard, the middle finger won't have that space thanks to the bump on the back. And you also have that back button there, so you end up lowering your grip to position your middle finger on that button, and because of that, your pinky finger won't have enough space to rest down there, creating the illusion that this controller has smaller grips. And this felt weird. After all, the original Wavebird controller had that bump below the analog sticks, right? Turns out that on the original Wavebird, the bump didn't go all the way to the grips, and that left a good space for all of your fingers. And this is not what happens on the Nyxi Wizzard. But not everything is bad about the ergonomics. On the original, the triggers were quite big, and you have a lot of space to wrap your fingers around them. Since the triggers aren't analog triggers anymore, they made more space to accommodate your fingers on the top of the controller. You can hold it like this, or hold it like this. And with the flatter buttons, it is more easy to swap between the shutter buttons and the triggers. And the travel distance of the trigger is small and quick. The analog stick gate is slightly smaller than the original one, but in my test it didn't make the controller feel less precise at all. The D-pad is quite bigger this time. On the original, your thumb could barely fit. On the Wizzard, it is much bigger and comfortable. The face buttons are backlit, which is very cool. But sadly, the face buttons didn't feel so good, especially the A button. On the original GameCube controller, the A button has a short travel distance. And when fully pressed, the button stops over the controller shell. On the Wizzard controller, the travel distance is much bigger. And when fully pressed, the button sits flat with the shell. And what's even worse is that if you press really hard, the button can actually sink under the controller shell. And for me, this ruins the feeling of the face buttons. This makes the controller look like any other third-party controller. And to prove my point, here's the comparison with other third-party controllers from that time. It sinks flat with the shell just like the Nyxi Wizzard. This one is from Dream Gear. And what about this one?
Fancy meeting you here, princess.
Remember me?
Anthony.
Jokes apart, the Mad Catz controller suffer from the same problem. It's not hard to see why they disappeared from the industry. This controller is almost obscene. Moving back to the Wizzard, the analog sticks can be removed and you can change the gates. And here you can see the K-Silver Hall Effect Sticks module, and they feel identical to any other regular analog stick. The resistance is the same and it moves very smoothly. Put back the analog stick and then you can insert the circular gate. And what's really cool is that you can mix these gates, keeping the octagonal gates for movement and have the circular gate for the camera. Or you can change both to the circular gates if you want. In the dock test, you can dock your Switch with these controllers. And when testing the analog sticks, I noticed a really small dead zone there. It is present, but in this controller it is so small that I don't think it will be a problem. For comparison, here's the Nyxi Athena controllers that I reviewed earlier. And you can clearly see how big the dead zone is in this controller. I criticized it very hard for this kind of dead zones, but it's good to see that they took the feedback and improved it on the Nyxi Wizzard. And the Wizzard is just perfect to play GameCube games like Metroid Prime Remastered on your Switch. You also have motion controls, and turbo functionality too. You can configure a shortcut for the back buttons, and you can also record macros this time. The Dpad was also improved, and on this controller the diagonals are much better. If you don't like the backlight on the buttons, you can turn them off. And you can also adjust the rumble intensity. Moving to the teardown, you have 4 screws on each controller, and here's the internals. The trigger and shoulder buttons have KL switches, which is very good. And this here might seem like HD rumble, but it's not, it's just a weight. The rumble is on this side. The battery has a capacity of 500 milliamps, and to access the front part, you have to remove a screw under the battery. Here you can see all of the switches for the D-pad and other buttons. Here's the magnet test, confirming that this is Hall effect sticks. On the other section, you have a similar construction, with the only difference being the face buttons that have rubber membranes instead of switches. The face buttons are different from the original ones, so you can swap them. And the rubber membranes have holes to let the light of the LEDs shine through. And now for some quick questions that I got from the community tab. Are they heavy? Yes, they are 50 grams more heavy than the original GameCube controller, but that's because the added weights that they put on the controller. If you remove them, the controller will feel a lot lighter. Can these be paired up with Android and iOS? Well, I tested them on my Android phone and they were seen as Joy-Con right and left, but each piece works as a separate controller, so you have to use them sideways. Can you swap the sticks with the original GameCube ones? Yes, but it requires a sandpaper and a lot of patience. I found this video that shows that the stick is a bit taller. To overcome this problem, you have to sand the base of the sticks. Only after that they will fit in the controller. Can you use the Switch built-in button remap function? Yes. And can you use them with emulators? Yes, but as an Android devices, you'll have to pair both controllers separately and configure each one on the emulator. The Yuzu emulator can accept inputs from two different controllers. All you have to do is select any on input device. And lastly, can it wake up the Switch? Yes. On my final thoughts, the Nyxi Wizzard is a good controller, but it is still not perfect. It was so close from being the perfect third-party GameCube controller. The D-pad feels great, they'd have fixed the deadzones problem with the analog sticks, not to mention that they are Hall sensing and drift proof now. It has back buttons with macro capabilities and motion controls. But they messed up with the ergonomics on the handles, and the face buttons could be a lot better. In the end, do I recommend this controller? Well, it depends. If you want to play competitively, especially Smash, this controller is not recommended. It will not only feel different from the original GameCube controllers, but it might even get you banned from the tournament as it has macro capabilities. But if you're looking for a controller to play Smash casually, or even play other games, Mario Kart, Metroid Prime, Super Mario Sunshine, it is definitely a good pick. You can find all the links in the description of this video. And that's it for today. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to help me out. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.